If you pay for something, you expect to get what you ask for. But when it comes to seafood in Chicago, these Dominican University students are learning that's not always true.
I was really shocked at how much fish is mislabeled.
A 2019 study by Ocean Conservation Group Oceana found about 1 in 5 fish samples across the country are mislabeled.
I thought, oh, I can do this. I'd love to try this with my students.
This fall, Professor Irina Kalin-Jagman invited NBC5 Response to join her biology class as the students fact-check the labels on their seafood through DNA sequencing.
Here, you can do this one and I'll do this one.
Okay.
That's what we'll do.
Cod.
You have cod. And I have
Or is it?
Or is it?
Or is it? Each student brought in 2 fish samples, most from a local grocery store or their favorite sushi restaurants around the Chicagoland area.
So one of the things with our study is that it has to be raw fish, so we can't use cooked fish.
Mine was about $3 because I bought the whole fish because I'm going to eat it later.
Are you still going to eat it if it's not what you thought it was?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
We have a lot of really cool samples. Look at this. We've got red snapper and catfish and swordfish. Woohoo!
First, the students worked to isolate DNA from their fish samples.
Yeah, the smell is a little smelly.
I definitely don't think I'm going to be a fish fan after this.
No, I wasn't a fish fan before and I don't plan on being one after.
The goal is to isolate what's called a barcoding gene,
Okay, now go ahead and put it in the 55 degrees.
which Irina says is the standard used to identify different species. Then the samples are sent off to a DNA sequencing lab for identification.
We can then put it in these nationally available, internationally available databases, and we can say, what does it match?
Fast forward 1 month, and the results are in.
So altogether, we were able to evaluate 84 samples, which is really exciting.
Overall, it was bad news for fish with white flesh like red snapper.
Red snapper is always something else other than red snapper, especially when you get it from a restaurant.
I bought a sea bass and I bought a red snapper sample, and I thought they looked completely different. It turns out they were the exact same fish.
And all the student samples of white or super white tuna actually turned out to be escolar.
So escolar is not tuna. It's a completely different species of fish, and it actually has really, really high mercury levels. It can be dangerous for pregnant women, and it's banned from selling in a lot of Europe and in Japan.
But there was good news for the cod and ocean perch samples my lab partner Emma brought in.
I think some of us were kind of disappointed. We were like, oh, we wanted to find something that wasn't what it was supposed to be, but overall that is a good thing.
Also good news for salmon and regular tuna.
Salmon is almost always salmon. Tuna is very often tuna.
Although this testing was done on a much smaller scale than Oceana's study, year after year, Irina says the results show Chicago fish samples are mislabeled up to 30% of the time. She says she's adjusted her dining habits accordingly.
I would personally stick to tuna and salmon myself. If you're adventurous, obviously there are lots of other fish you can try at sushi restaurants, but it's both good news and bad news, right?
Here are a few key takeaways from the testing. If you want an expensive fish like red snapper, your chances of getting the real deal are much better if you buy it at a grocery store. And get the full fish if you really want to avoid being duped. Finally, be thoughtful about where you buy your fish. Several grocery stores proudly advertise their seafood sourcing programs and allow you to track fish from the sea to the store. PJ Randhawa, NBC5 Responds.
Now NBC5 Responds. Craving fish, maybe cod or some red snapper? Well, studies show you may actually be getting duped fish instead, a completely different, usually cheaper fish than the one you ordered. It's called seafood fraud, and studies have shown it's happening in quite a few Chicago restaurants. PJ Randhawa shares how you can make sure you're getting the real deal.
Is your seafood catfishing you?
If you took labels off of all of your fish, would the public be able to tell what's what?
Maybe not. Maybe not.
We're here at Hooked on Fish Fish Market in Edgewater to see if diehard seafood lovers like Kathy can actually tell one fish from another.
That's trout, but it could be salmon. That one I think is halibut, but I'm not sure.
And because it's hard to tell just by looking at them, experts say seafood fraud is flourishing around the country. Dr. Marla Valentine is with the Ocean Conservation Group, Oceana.
The most common is when a high value fish, something really expensive, is swapped for something that is quite cheap and is potentially dangerous or caught unsustainably or illegally.
Dr. Valentine says the fraud is so prevalent, it's hard to believe it's not intentional. A 2019 study by Oceana found 1 in 5 fish samples tested was mislabeled, and seafood was more frequently mislabeled at restaurants and smaller markets rather than larger grocery chains. But in Chicago, the problem is worse, especially for one particular fish.
Previous analyses in Chicago, for example, found that about 71% of the salmon tested from restaurants was fraudulent.
So which types of fish are most likely to be swapped out for a cheaper knockoff? Per the Oceana study, 45% of red snapper samples were actually tilapia or grouper, while 55% of sea bass samples were switched out for perch or tilapia. Between each of those fish, the price difference can be up to $30 per pound. Dr. Valentine says farmed salmon is often sold as wild-caught salmon. And then there's the issue with sushi.
We can see tuna. When you get tuna at a sushi restaurant, can actually be escalar. And one of the real problems with substitution such as escalar is that it comes with a number of health risks. Either it's a species high in mercury or histamines if you have allergens.
Back at Hooked on Fish.
Copper River salmon is really popular at the beginning of the season. That is something that is often mislabeled.
Owner Karen Mullins points out exactly how seafood fraud hits consumers where it hurts, their wallets.
Beginning of the season would cost, $45 a pound-ish or more. And if you just get regular sockeye salmon, hardly anybody knows.
But if it's such an open secret, why is seafood fraud still happening? Dr. Valentine says there is a federal fisheries monitoring program in place, but it's extremely limited in scope, focusing on just 13 distinct species.
So nearly 70% of the seafood that we bring in isn't being inspected, does not have that traceability paperwork so that we can ensure what we are buying is what we are buying.
Dr. Valentine says the program should include all seafood, but until it does, her advice:
get the least processed possible. Get it as the whole fish, or if that's a little scary, get it filleted and it still has the skin on.
So how common is seafood fraud in Chicago today? We partnered with Dominican University to find out. In part 2 of our investigation, we reveal what DNA testing of fish samples from local markets and restaurants found, exposing which fish are mislabeled and most likely to catfish you. PJ Randawa, NBC5 responds.